Hi, everybody. Good day, everybody. Welcome to our show. We are the Cappuccino Club Social TV, and my name is Viola Manuel, and I'm going to be the host of our show today. And of course, it's a lovely welcome from Cape Town. We are on, I think it's day 26 of lockdown in South Africa. And on day one, we had the most amazing guests with us, and we promised you that we would bring our guests back after the, at the end of phase one. And we now have our guests with us. But before I welcome our guests, I just want to welcome all our viewers on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Periscope, on all the social platforms that we are active on. We want to welcome all of you, and we look forward to you engaging with you. And of course, just you sending in your comments. We have Terine with us today, and last time we only heard Terine's voice, but today we actually get to see her on camera with us. Welcome, Terine. Terine is the Managing Director of EmpowerLink Services, and she's a mom of 2 toddlers. I need to know how working from home has gone with those 2 toddlers. And she's an experienced Chartered HR Practitioner with the South African Board for People Practice. And of course, is also the founder and owner of EmpowerLink Services, an HR consulting company which focuses on small and medium business size businesses. And then we also have Lisa with us, who's an attorney and a labor relations specialist practicing in the southern suburbs with the law firm Guy and Associates. And they're a boutique firm which practices exclusively in the area of labor relations consulting, training, and litigation. In addition to her work as an attorney, Lisa also volunteers on the board of Sisters Incorporated, an NPO and shelter for victims of gender-based violence. And she's responsible for the legal portfolio, which includes, of course, advising on the areas of human resources. Ladies, welcome, and thank you for joining us again on the Cappuccino Club Social TV.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lisa, tell me how have things been going working from home now? The first time we spoke, it was on day one. Have you sort of fallen into a groove? Have you got a structure in place?
Yeah, so I think we actually do have quite a good routine now. We start our days with a staff meeting, which is by video conference, and we all just check in. I mean, sometimes there'll be 5 minutes, sometimes there'll be half an hour. It depends whether there's actually something to chat about, but it just sort of helps you feel connected, feel like you're still part of a team, and then you carry on with your work for the day. And I have to say, at least on my side, it's been completely overwhelmingly busy, so that's fantastic for us. I think during these times there's just a lot of uncertainty and people need a lot of assistance to maneuver through this.
From home for you?
Thank you so much, Viola. It's been going well. I think we've transitioned well as a team to work remotely. The only challenge I've experienced is being a mom of 2 toddlers and balancing that. But we've also found a routine, and so I've obviously both myself and my husband are in lockdown, so we do it in shifts. So I'll work a few hours, and then he watches the kids, and then I will watch the kids and do a few hours, and then a few extra hours after the kids are sleeping. So you know what, we do what we can and we try and adapt. And then with regards to the team, we also have a daily check-in, and it's really a catch-up and also for our team to feel engaged and still connected. So yeah, it's been a journey of adaptation, really.
Okay, yeah, I think it's been that way for most of our guests. And one of the things that I've just observed, I think, is that everybody is doing what works for them. So some people are following a rigid routine and sort of sticking to it. Other people are sort of just laid back and doing their things. One lady actually commented, one guest commented on the fact that she's a nocturnal, she's a nocturnal animal. So she just enjoys the idea of being able to work late at night into early hours of the morning and then sleeping in, during the day. So I think everybody's just taken to doing it, in a way that suits them and sort of suit their personalities, I guess, and their home circumstances. So I'm glad to see both of you have survived, but I know that there's a lot happening in the HR relations space right now. Initially spoke, I think some of our concerns were like, could people be forced to take leave and Jane pay and all of that? But have there been any other sort of issues in terms of HR and labor relations that have been trending that we didn't discuss last time? Anything new happening, Lisa?
Yeah, so I think I know Terine has been dealing with this probably more than I have in the HR side, but definitely the biggest thing that's come out is this TERS application. So everyone trying to figure out how this works in terms of submitting the application, what are the benefits that are going to pay out? And I mean, honestly, the application process has probably changed on about every second day. So how it would work is you would send an email to the COVID-19 allocated email address of the Department of Labor, and then they give you an automated response about how to submit this application. That automated response was changing about every other day. So now we seem to have settled, and it seems to be an online process that is, the easiest. We've been seeing people get paid out within a few days of submitting using the online portal. But honestly, I think that's been one of the biggest issues, is just trying to figure out what's required there.
Okay, and Terine, what has your experience been? What are the final, as we speak, what are the final sort of requirements and criteria?
Sorry, I lost you there for a minute. The final criteria.
Okay, Terine, what are the current requirements and criteria for you to make application?
Okay, so the criteria is actually set, as Lisa mentioned. It has changed, and so if the employee or employer actually sends the email to the automated response, to the allocated email address, then they would give the actual instructions. So there is an Excel sheet that needs to be completed. That's with your employee data. And then there's a memorandum of understanding that also needs to be signed by the employer. You're undertaking to pay out the staff the monies due to them. And so it actually does detail the steps that needs to follow in the actual automated email. As Lisa mentioned, the actual criteria and process has changed frequently. So I think that people just need to send that email to the COVID-19 email address. We'll make it available again on the socials. We'll make it available to the club if they haven't made application, and then it will detail the steps to follow in the actual email. So with regards to any
great. And has it been highly Terine, go ahead on the trending issues, the trending HR issues.
Sure. So just in terms of the trending HR issues, I think that definitely the payment of staff and how companies are going to actually pay the staff has been a challenge, and one of the most frequently asked questions initially and during lockdown. Obviously, with the lockdown being extended, that poses more challenges, and I've received notification that we are going to be addressed by the President this evening And so that will also guide us in terms of the further challenges or needs that we as HR professionals and also companies like Guy and Associates will have to assist and guide companies within the next few weeks. So the payment of staff has definitely been one of the challenges. Then I think another important thing at the moment is mental health and the focus on employee wellness and making sure that your staff are still engaged during the lockdown period and that they are being productive. And so as HR professionals, we have to explore ways of how can we actually still keep the engagement levels going and keep staff proactive and productive. And so the daily check-ins and a set routine and structure, talking about the employee issues, not just work, so balancing it with work and also just checking how are you doing as an employee, because it can be very difficult for somebody that has a pre-existing condition like anxiety or depression. So just being mindful that this lockdown has had quite a negative impact on individuals that have those pre-existing conditions prior to lockdown. So as employers, we need to be mindful and reasonable with those employees. So just having a daily conversation also actually, and then connectivity actually helps ease that, although there are other forms of wellness that employers really need to consider.
Yeah, that's Lisa. I don't know. I do want to actually ask you a little bit about Sisters Incorporated and what your experience has been around the whole sort of wellness and how people are coping. One of the things we've been talking about on the show is just, having those touch points with your employees that is not necessarily about work, but, just being able to pick up the phone when you can and just say to them, look, how are you coping? Is there any additional stuff that you need that we can talk about privately? And we've really been encouraging employers to do that, especially when you sit with a very small team, just touch base with them all the time. We had a fantastic guest on, she was with Laurie's Foundation. She was speaking about mental health and that there's so many sort of websites that you can go to now and just check in on people, just activities that can be done for people who do suffer from anxiety and depression and so on. And so I think that is a big concern for us. But Lisa, just to go off track and just ask you about the work that you're doing with Sisters Incorporated. How are you finding, what are you finding social circumstances? How is society responding to this lockdown from your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I'm not the person who's on the ground like our fantastic staff who are there on a day-to-day basis. But I have to say that, I mean, we have an amazing chairperson of our board, and she has just been encouraging constant communication with especially the manager and the more senior staff to just know that, we're still available, even if we're not coming and having meetings and we're not visiting like we ordinarily would be there a lot more frequently, to show that there is another level of support available. It's more just make contact in other ways, whether it's just that you send a message just to say, thank you so much, we appreciate that you are going above and beyond during this time. And I think just making people feel like they're not isolated, really.
Correct. So, we've been doing a lot of focusing on the show on how business owners could pivot at this time, how they could actually be reinventing themselves and making themselves relevant even at this time. And I think just a sort of summary of what we were saying is try and get online, try and start doing some live streaming and sharing tips and ideas on that people would need to know at lockdown, at this time of lockdown, tips and ideas on how to just help them survive, basically from your point of view and from your frame of reference. So we've really been trying to encourage that. But I think one of the things that's really come out for us is that constant communication. It's something we mentioned in our first show, constant communication between yourself and all your stakeholders, whether it be your internal staff, your internal customer, your external customer. But there are some questions that have come through from our viewers, which I do want to try and get to before, time goes so quickly with this. One of the things we've been speaking about is the fact that, with what we're suspecting will be phase 3, which will be a partial lockdown, many companies will have to actually almost put forward a plan on how they intend to keep their staff safe. So if staff are going to be coming to work, if that industry is identified for an industry where people can go back to work, people, our bosses are going to have to show very clearly what the process will be in terms of keeping their employees safe. Have you guys had any kind of discussions around that? Are employers approaching you on this topic already? Let's talk to Lisa.
Yeah, so I would say we've probably only been approached by about 2 clients so far, but it's something that we've already taken on ourselves because we know it's going to need to be implemented. So we're currently in discussions with some health and safety representatives so that hopefully we can have a sort of partnered policy that we put together that we can roll out to clients that do require it. So it's going to have the aspects of labor relations as well as health and safety, because I think right now, they very much are going to be working together. There's going to be things to do with hygiene. There's going to be things to do with health and safety that aren't necessarily what I deal with on a daily basis. And then there's also going to be aspects to do with how we're going to deal with the leave implications. I think a lot of people are in a position where they've taken a lot of leave over this shutdown, and potentially they've been on sick leave as a result of having the virus. And then, a lot of people I think are going to have exhausted their leave by about May of this year. And ordinarily they wouldn't be in this position. So there's that HR aspect as well that's going to need to be implemented. So I think rolling out a policy to deal with it going forward, and it's definitely something that we're busy working on now because I think it's going to be needed by about 1 May.
Yeah, agreed. So, Terine, what do you think some of the features of that policy is going to be in terms of HR, from an HR perspective, the policies around just keeping your staff safe?
Sure. Thanks, Viola, and thanks, Lisa. So we have partnered with a health and safety specialist, and so we do have a draft procedure available, and basically it covers self-isolation. So firstly, isolating yourself and social distancing in the workplace. So social distancing, meaning, are you going to allow, obviously business won't be business as usual. So coming into the premises, disinfecting your shoes and not using clock cards where there's touch points as an example when you're entering the premises. So you could be disinfecting the visitors and providing them with safety gear going into the premises. That's one example. Then providing so then transportation of staff. How are staff getting to work? The sitting in vehicles. You're not going to be sitting in vehicles next. So you're not going to be sitting next to a passenger. You're going to be sitting in every second seat, for instance. In meetings, how are you going to conduct your meetings? Are you going to continue with virtual meetings and limit meetings within the workplace? And then also the distancing of desks. How are your desks close to one another, or your seating arrangements within meetings will have to be adapted. So I think that the social distancing within the workplace, staggered meal breaks, provision of PPE, so personal protective equipment, the use of personal protective equipment, how do you use and dispose of masks, when do you change it, what is the purpose of a cloth mask and how does it protect you versus a surgical or a different type of mask. So it's going to be about educating the staff pre-lockdown, or pre the lifting of the lockdown, so that when they come on site, they know what the protocols is. It's almost as if your staff would require a health and safety induction a reinduction when they start.
Yeah.
Just to, and not just your staff, but also the clients, your suppliers. Are your suppliers going to be allowed as per normal, or is there going to be a special waiting area for them? And obviously the sanitizing and cleaning, additional cleaning materials available, sanitizers available at different in meeting rooms, cleaning surfaces that are used on a regular basis. So that's going to be cleaned more frequently during the day. So those are types of things. So I would say social distancing in the workplace and outside of the workplace. I think also a lot of companies will, where you can work remotely, should consider allowing that even while it's lifted, for the safety of those employees, if they are still obviously able to do that, but that's something to consider. I think that, so for me, the key points is social distancing, the use of PPE, communicating with your stakeholders, your employees, before lockdown on how the protocols are going to work once people return to work.
Yeah, I think, we've sort of been trying to guess what it would look like, what the partial lockdown is going to look like. And one of the things we're talking about is some organizations may actually bring on a full-time nurse, to test staff, check temperatures and basic health checks before you even are allowed onto the premises. I know some of the food manufacturers are already doing that. But one of the questions that came out was, look, we expect that with partial lockdown, people who are at high risk in terms of having pre-existing health conditions would continue to be under full lockdown. So, like the elderly and people who are sick would continue to have to, they would have to stay in under full lockdown. Now, one of the questions that were asked is, would people be forced to declare their pre-existing conditions? I know with COVID-19 that you have to declare if you're not feeling well, or if you do suffer from the virus, you have to declare that you're legally obligated to. But are you legally obligated, and will you be legally obligated to declare any kind of underlying health issue? And what will be done with that information? Are you going to be disadvantaged? Are you going to be told, look, you can't come back to work, and you sit with a further financial burden? Lisa, what is your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's going to depend where that mandate is coming from about whether you need to still stay home. So if it's going to come from a piece of legislation that says you may not leave your house if you fit into these X criteria, then I think you're going to have to disclose it, because otherwise your employer is going to say, why aren't you coming to work? At the very least, you're going to have to disclose, I fit into the criteria. And I don't think that you need to go further than that. You don't have to say which exact criteria you meet. I mean, if it's age, it might be a little bit obvious, but if it's an illness, then I think all you would need to say is that I fit into those criteria. I'm afraid I'm not able to attend at work. But you can't be forced to disclose any kind of illness in terms of the details of it. You only need to tell your employer as much as is required to make sure that they know that you have a reasonable excuse for not attending at work and for having to abide by these laws. Your employer can't request that you break a law. So that wouldn't be a reasonable instruction. So I think as long as it is regulated by one of the new regulations or piece of legislation, it should be fine. That being said, can there be an adverse consequence? I mean, I'm hoping that they wouldn't be, but I know what has been happening is because people have been operating under sort of a skeleton staff, they have found that possibly some duties can be absorbed. And that's a reality that has emerged during this time with some of our clients, is they've almost indirectly, they've realized that they can do without some roles, and they've been able to reduce. It's not an intention, and it's certainly not a nice thing to have come from this. But if they realized, if you are forced to stay home and they have 95% of their workforce present and they realize they're able to function without you, unfortunately, that might result in an adverse consequence of retrenchment. But it's not going to be because of your illness. It's not going to be because of the virus. It's going to be because your employer operationally has realized they don't need your role.
Okay, that's a very important important bit of information. But if you are, you fall into this category of high risk, I think what people are trying to figure out is, can you be put through a disciplinary if you don't declare it? And like you're saying, it's really going to be dependent on where the mandate comes from. If it's legislated that you have to declare that you're part of high risk, you will have to declare it. If it's not, then would you still be expected to declare? Is it an ethical issue? Is it a moral issue?
I think, I would say it's not in your interest to keep that to yourself, because you're putting yourself at extreme risk and your employer isn't knowing that they're putting you at that risk. Okay. But at the same time, if you make that decision and you say, I'm not telling my employer I'd rather run that risk, then that it's your choice to prioritize your privacy and your confidentiality over that risk to your health. But no, your employer won't be able to force you to do that. I highly recommend that you disclose it, because I think for the majority of the cases, the employer will be willing to adapt your role as necessary just for this temporary period. And unless it's an ongoing problem. I think, if it's a couple of months where they have to have a bit of an adapted role, I think most employers would rather do that than, just call it quits.
Yeah. Terine, we also had another interesting conversation, a lot of comments on this whole issue of moonlighting. Now that you're working from home, you don't have your boss down the passage from you, and people are really just struggling financially. And so there might be the opportunity for you to be able to offer your services to another employer. Your contract doesn't say anything about the fact that you can't moonlight, and that I just think that the circumstances, nobody expected COVID-19 and lockdown. So I think a lot of employment contracts were written for every other time but this, would you be able to, what are the implications if you did choose to moonlight and your contract doesn't say you're not allowed to moonlight? Could you moonlight? Could you be getting additional income? Terine, that question's for you.
Sure. I would say that the best, I would say that for me, be open and honest. I've always believed in that, and have the conversation with your employer, and your contract of employment is something that was negotiated with you at the beginning of your employment, and during this time, it's a unusual state of business, and so there's nothing stopping you from asking the question. I'd rather be forthright and advise people to ask the question and say that if I am struggling financially, is it possible, and then have an addendum to the contract and have it amended for the lockdown period. But doing it without their knowledge can be I would not recommend that. I would say that could be regarded as something on a misconduct side. So maybe Lisa can comment on that.
Okay, Lisa, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, just quickly, I think always just, even if you do not have it in your contract, bear in mind that you do have a duty to perform your work to the best of your ability for your primary employer. So if your secondary employment is going to impact that negatively, it doesn't really matter what your contract says, you're still breaching that duty to your primary employer to give them the best of your ability. So make sure if you are taking on secondary employment, even if it's with permission, it can't impact your primary duties.
Okay, ladies, just last question so quickly. I need to really wrap up. in terms of data costs and the costs of actually working from home, there are cost implications. Data, you working off your own device, you've had to get additional security software, et cetera. What's the advice you would have for an employee that wants to actually continue to do their work at the best possible, at the best quality and standard, but they're not getting supported there? How would they go about that? Is it, just having a conversation with your employer, or is there anything that the employer is obligated to do? Lisa, you want to just tackle that one?
Yeah, I mean, first thing is have a conversation and explain the difficulties that you're experiencing in how you do your job. And if you aren't able to do your job because of your limitations and you can't afford to get better equipment or software, then that needs to be disclosed. And I think if your employer takes a hard stance on it and says, no, I can't afford currently to give you anything else, and that's a reality as well, because employers are not, raking in a lot of money at this time. So they may say that, but at least if you've disclosed what your limitations are, then there can't be a performance issue down the line. So maybe your employer will come back to you in a month and say you're working too slow. You'll say, I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do with the equipment I have. And at least it's been disclosed. Okay,
great. Terine, do you want to add anything to that very quickly?
I think, sure. I think Lisa covered that quite well. It's really about your workplace. Your home has now become your workplace. And so an employer has the duty still to give you the resources so that you can perform your duties. So I think there needs to be a conversation around that. And there needs to be reasonableness and also practical solutions being offered, and also understanding under the circumstances from both the employer and the employee side. That needs to be accommodated.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us again. It's always such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for sharing all the information that you have shared with us. And please stay safe and everything of the best. And just try and rest a little bit and take care of yourselves. It's when you're so busy, you very seldom get the chance to take care of yourself. But I think prioritize yourselves a little bit of self-love. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having us again.
Thanks. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Terine. And from me, Viola Manuel, thank you so much for joining us today. And please feel free to make add your comments and be part of the conversation and engage with us through your comments. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.